giving you a hard time.
It keeps my garb together right now until I repair it.
All right. So the first video we have is going to be Slips's recording of a little history about King Neb. So if you're not familiar with Neb, this is a good opportunity to learn some things about it, or him. So here is the video for King Neb presented by Slippery. As soon as I pull it up.
Good morning, King.
I do have a warning. There may be some language in this video. Slippery didn't get the memo that this is a family-friendly event, so just a fair warning, there is a profanity in here at some point. All right.
Good morning, King. Tell me that when Shackle is fine, it's also
His voice is a little quiet.
And is the great goblin, a king, a general, has slaughtered millions of creatures, demons, and goblins. But he hasn't always been known as King Neb. Because goblins reincarnate and always have lived in his lives, but only twice has he been called Neb. The first time was in the beginning, before Balk's betrayal, before the War of the Gods. He's one of the great generals, one of the great goblins. He helped us through this war. Legendary goblin. When he was killed, just like always, his soul did not return back. It did not come true. All takes his bite from our souls as he passed through the gate. So he did not have the strength he should. Bulk has always hated him more than anyone else, which says a lot because Bulk is an asshole. Fucking him. Every time Neb's soul is about to be born, Bulk singles him out in the river of goblin souls and attacks him. And every time Neb's soul fights to the end, or fights in the end. But in the river, Neb's spirit is too strong. When Bulk is manifested in there, his flesh, his fright, his demon strength is almost no match for Neb's spirit because he's so fucking stubborn. Neb's spirit is only ever to overcome Bulk once and return to his full strength. That time, his soul was born into the current goblin we call King Neb, or Nebuchadnezzar, Neb, King of the Nezzer. Neb was not the original name of this goblin, but it is now. Original name, King Neb, is lost to time. This goblin, like the kingdom of Nezzer, restored our power, deserves the name King. The past lives of Neb is unknown. It's like all of his lives were salvaged by Bulk, and he did not have any longer strength. But it is possible the other great goblin's heroes has a soul, simply lesser unrecognized. The soul of King Neb, old King Neb, and King Nebuchadnezzar is the only one of the great goblins that are still with us. Breath was taken, Satan was cursed, Scriba descended, and Bulk betrayed us. Only Neb returns, which is unfortunate, because he's an asshole. Neb has many stories. They're all on get.org. If you want to read them, they're all great. So, let's talk about some IRL context. Neb is probably one of the oldest, I think he is the oldest current oligarch relic. He's older than Numenor's Night Banner. He's older than most people currently fighting. He was bought by Izareth in after Halloween clearance sale in 1997. I was 0 then, and he's been pretty much everywhere. There's been foam fighting, coast to coast. He's lived in people's closets. He's been to many events, and probably every major one. And he's ended up with me recently. He is very spooky. He likes his eyeballs licked and long walks on the beach. He has many great details. Look, his eye. It's amazing. And that was me, Slippery, talking about King Neb. If you want to talk to me about him or anything, Goblin, look up Slippery William Hafford on Facebook. Shoot me a message. I'll gladly answer any question you have. Thank you for watching this video, and have a good Chaos Wars.
All right, so that was Slippery presenting. I apologize for the volume. Slippery submitted that video about King Neb. We've got a couple more presentations here, but my co-host has just joined me. Hello, Krash. I'm not sure. I think you're on mute.
There we go. I forgot it wasn't on California time, and I was playing guitar.
No worries. Well, welcome. So both of us are here. We're doing the lore thing. We wanted to mention that we can answer questions. There's a lot of lore experts kind of floating around this chat. We know some things. There are other people in the chat that know things. So if there's any questions about lore in general, feel free to ask away. We'll have a little bit of time between each presentation just to kind of cover any questions or comments about anything, but feel free to post those up in the chat or raise your hand if you've got them. Otherwise, we're just going to keep rolling on it, I suppose. Quinn Games says, I don't know anything. I'll have you know.
I'll have you know that is a lie.
Knowing nothing is the first step to knowing everything.
It's true. Well, while we're on the subject of Neb, we are going to jump over to another presentation. This one from Kazi, a witch doctor who happens to know quite a bit about goblin lore. Kazi has sent us a video about the death of Neb, which kind of takes place a little bit out of context for where we were previously in the lore jumps, but there's some background information here that you can find on Geddon, or if you could talk to any of the goblin lore experts, I'm sure they could figure it out for you and determine where exactly this falls. But I think Kazi has a video presentation for us. So it should be hopefully louder than Slippery's.
Yeah, even the part I heard was a little bit quiet.
Yeah, it was, unfortunately, Slips was whispering 'cause I believe he couldn't record too loud where he was. But we're going to jump right to Kazi presenting the death of King Neb.
Everybody knows that the goblins were created first, of course. The wisest, the most powerful, the prettiest of all. But some wonder, and some ask me, but Kazi, if you're all so good, and if you were first, how did we get here anyways? Well, of course, I know there is an answer to that, smartass. It all has to do with, of course, the Great War. The gods created all of the other creatures of the world, the elves, the bugbears, dwarves, and so on, and waged war on the goblins. The Great War started with the betrayal when the gods convinced one of the 5 great goblins, Bulk, to turn on the other goblins and curse them, sap some of their ancient strength, the way we were in the beginning when Malashkar had created us. After that came the throwing of the stones and the falling of the stars in the sky, where the gods claimed their parts of the earth. And then came the war. The war between the goblins and the gods and all of their creatures. And you might think, well, what sort of a war would that have been? Just a bunch of goblins against the gods themselves? Well, it was the closer thing than you would have thought, because even with the betrayal of Bulk, that left 4 great goblins. Each of whom was capable of killing a god in their own right. And so the 4 great goblins Reth, Sifu, Scribbit, and Neb led the war. Reth and Sifu's great plan to gather their strength and crush the gods in a great battle. But at the end, the story I will tell you now is the death of Neb and the end of our hopes. It begins in the great city of the goblins, where all were preparing for the final battle versus the gods and all of their creatures. And Ned was sitting in council with the other three, with Ref, King, with Sifu, Scribbit, and himself. And Neb have a sense that something be wrong, that they are running out of time. And he tells the others, I think we must move. I think that we cannot wait. And they tell him, no, Neb, if we move too soon, then our plan will not have a chance to succeed. We must wait until all is ready. Neb, you must continue to hold them back until the time is ready. It's like Neb, a sense of dread overwhelmed him. A sense that pain is. But Neb does not have fear. Dread, perhaps, but never fear. So he takes his soldiers, his crows, he calls them with their black coats, swift in the night, and he takes them out of the city to wage war again. And he climb. He leave the mountain. He leave the city, and he go out into the wilderness again, and he find a great range of mountains. And he, with his spear, he climbs the mountain. And he had never seen this range of mountains before. And you might think to yourself, well, that's weird. Well, just the range of mountains comes out of nowhere. You can find that to be odd. Well, of course, he found it to be odd. But back in the day when all of the gods is walking around on the earth, strange things happen. Strange, inexplicable things happen. So he goes to investigate this range of mountains. But it's not until that he reaches the very top that he realizes what this range of mountains is. It not be mountains at all, but it be a body, a corpse of a god. And not just any god, but the great god Uran, the first creation of Malashikad, the greatest of all the gods save Malashikad himself. Marge, I would argue, but don't show this video to our comment. It's not about the budget. It's in the look at you. Now, he looked down on the body of the god, and he see the great wound that has been cut in the body, and the blood gushing forth like water. And his sense of doom overtake him. And he did not know why the other gods would have murdered Uran, or for what purpose, but he knew that something terrible was wrong. And it's at that moment that he hears the screams of his soldiers in the valley below, and he fly down the mountainside back to them. But long before he reaches it, all of the screams have gone silent, and at the base of the mountain, all he finds is death. He walked through the bodies of his fallen soldiers, and he finds that they have been killed in different ways. Some have been burned beyond recognition. Some have been drowned in the dry land, drowned with their faces twisted and bloated. Some of them seem to have been crushed by the stones of the earth themselves, and others whipped into the trees and slashed to pieces. Now he understands. He understands the death of Uran, for Uran was the god of the gods of the earth, of the four elements, and he understands that the other gods had betrayed Uran to kill him and steal his power, and use that power, the power of the four elements, to create monstrous beasts of each of the four elements, and use them to hunt, not to hunt his soldiers. His soldiers were just victims. It was not here for them. Neb knew who the monsters were there for. The monsters were there to kill him. He was the great goblin. He was the general. If the monsters could kill him, it would doom the hopes of the goblins. But Neb was not afraid. Not afraid of the gods, not afraid of their monsters. And he knew that if he could kill their monsters in turn, all of that power would be wasted. All of that effort and strength would be wasted. And the gods would be at their mercy when the time for the attack came. So he picked up his spear and he hunted. The first beast was the beast of the water. He saw it in the lake, the dark shadows underneath the surface, and he dived in after it. And he chased it through the deep parts of the lake, and it pursued him, and they grappled each other in the darkness beneath the waters, and he hooked it. He hooked the monster, and he dragged it from the water, out from the wet and into the sun, and he stake it out in the sun until it dried out and it died in pain. Then he got the second beast. The second beast he see moving in a cave, and he pursued it deep underground. The beast of earth. It dived from the earth like a fish in water, in and out of the cave, attacking him, pursuing him, trying to crush him with rocks, trying to suffocate him in the deep parts of the earth. But Neb chased it, and he strangled it, and he dragged it from the ground, and he drowned it in the lake, and he killed it. Just as he looked up from the murder of the second beast, he heard a roar in the air, and he looked to the air, but the beast was not in the air. He looked around and he saw it, the smoke rising, the red glow. It was the beast of fire. The whole forest burned. It come for him, and Neb could do nothing but run. He run from the beast, he run from the flames. They chase him, they burn his heels, and he run for days. For days and days he run. He run ahead of the flames, round and around, and the fire always pursue him. And then finally, he turned, and the fire laughed and leaped towards him, not realizing that there would be no more wood to burn, that they are in a part of the forest that has already been reduced to nothing but ash, and there's no more fuel for the beast. And his flames flicker out, and Neb see the creature itself, and he murder it. The last beast is the beast of air, and Neb hear it laugh in the winds, and he chase it. He chased the beast of the winds across the plains, over the mountains, to the highest peak into the sky itself. And there he finds it when it can go no higher. And he grapple with it, but it be air. And he look at it and it laugh at him. And it charge him. And Neb see its heart. And he stab it. But at the last moment, Neb realize he has been tricked. He feels the curse. And as he stabbed the beast of air through his heart, he feels his spear pierce his own heart. And the wound he deals to the beast, he deals to himself. The beast of air dies. And Neb dies. And our hopes die. And Neb go to the river of souls and is reborn. But as he is reborn, Balk takes his share of Neb's soul. And he returns not himself, and no one knows him. And that was the beginning of Eden for the goblins.
So that was Kazi presenting The Death of King Neb. the very first incarnation of Neb, when he first fell. If anyone has any questions or comments about that, feel free to throw them up in chat or raise your hand or discuss them a little bit. But that's a very cool story to hear from a very talented storyteller. Cord says, love that setup so much. Yeah, Kazi and Gama did a great job setting up the videos. They're both fantastic storytellers. We've got some more videos from them later on. But I think next up is a video actually from Cord. We're going to kind of move through, and unless anyone has anything to stop us, we've got Cord up next. So he's presented a video. I haven't even seen this one yet. He just sent it to me.
I just recorded it too.
Yep. So hopefully this works. I haven't tested this one in particular, but we'll check the volumes and everything. Let's see if we can get this one rolling.
Indeed, my friends, thank you for coming. Listen well to this story, for lessons can be learned. Long ago, in the age of creation, there was a young goblin, Kadi, named Rashmi. She be traveling and came across a group of goblins who had been beaten back numerous times by the great elf king. At least 3 different times they had been beaten back. Rashmi see that the goblins be weaker than they should be, and suspects some treachery. Smelling the air, she declares that she will seek out the elf king and break the curse that was placed on the goblins, for she is Kadin Rashmish. She rallies her skrill, and riding on their spiders, she raced towards the elf king's fortress. They dispatched the guards, and spiders carried them up over the walls. Rashmish leading from the front, ready to attack, but is stunned. She be stunned to find that the elf king already is dead. His body laid out on a great table, and all his people around in hushed tone, speaking about it being his time. Rashmish is confused and furious. How dare this elf king die before she could kill him? In her wrath, her and her skrill descended upon the mortars and slaughtered the lot of them. However, nothing is found which will break the curse. Every elf within the fortress is killed, and Rashmish notices as they die, their souls are pulled away. As the last elf dies, she notices a barely visible thread and thinks, I shall follow it. And jumping on her spider, she travels and chases the thread, hoping to find the elf king's soul to punish him for his dying. She travels long, but loses her way. Then a great idea come upon the great Rashmish, the Kadin. She will seek out the elf princess, kill her, and follow her soul to the elf king. So Rashmish seek out a witch doctor to help her with these magics. Once the spell is complete, she came upon the elf princess in her sleep, and with her fanged sword cut the elf princess's throat. Quickly, a soul emerges, and Rashmish grabs on. The soul, kicking and screaming in shock. "What have you done? It is not my time!" Rashmish in fury nearly let go. But remember, no. And as the soul is pulled away, Rashmish follows, hanging on. The soul so angry, it kicking and biting and screaming and pushing, and still Rashmish hangs on. Gradually, the elf soul calms down and begins to lose its form as it is pulled across the veil, connecting the mortal and immortal worlds. Rashmish pulls with the soul, and as she breaks through the veil, the soul becomes a thread, and she loses her grip, falling. But she is already in the great void, where she sees before her an enormous wooden spider weaving its web. She sees souls coming in and souls going out. But the mighty spider does not see Rashmish. Rashmish, as a great Khatin, takes this as an offense and jumps onto the spider, hacking and slashing. Though being made of wood, Khatin Rashmish's fanged sword did nothing. So, in more fury, she slashed and hacked at the web. But the web, too, is indestructible. This is too much for Rashmish, and her fury is palpable in the air. She jumped onto the spider and stabbed her sword into its eye. Using all of her weight and her leverage, she pry until she pulls an eye from the spider's head. In a cackle laughter, Rashmish no, and soon she pulled all of the eyes from the spider and its soul. But the spider takes no notice to Rashmish's work. Just furious in triumph, Rashmish has all the eyes, and the spider blindly weaving its web. But Rashmish sees souls coming out and in as quickly as they came, and holes appear in the thread that the spider wove. Something was wrong. Rashmish could smell it. And nearly as quick as she had come, a great voice appeared in her mind, angry. "What have you done to my Obelies? What have you done to my Obelies? You are and your kind will pay dearly for your deeds. Already fall before us." Rashmish's heart was filled with dread and fear. She not know why, but her legs take her and run from the void, and upon crossing the veil she fell. Only one eye in her hand. Once in the mortal plane, she found that as she grasped the eye in her remaining hand, she saw everything that had happened before and to come, all that had transpired in her absence. She saw that it was not the elves who had placed a curse on the goblins, but Balk himself, that betrayer. She saw Neb's soldiers, the crows, fall, and then the unthinkable, Neb himself. She saw the fate of the powerful witch doctor Sifu trapped in the underworld, and she saw Scribbit ascend in his rage. And then before her eyes, she saw what is to befall to Reth the king, and nearly racked with despair, she ran back to the citadel to give Reth the eye and prevent what she had seen. But as she approached, Reth was donning his armor, and as she came to tell him her news, he stopped her. With a devilish grin, placing the eye of Maleshikad on his forehead, he said, "Tell me not what will happen, but act accordingly for your tribe. I have a plan to destroy those who will destroy us." And without a second thought, Neb marched with his armies, all the way to the Great Wall. Unfortunately, well, the rest is history. But what is not known by many is that Kadin Rashmish took the great King Rex's advice, and as he and the goblins marched to battle, she took her skrill and marched the other way. In anticipation of the great tragedy to come, she took her tribe and went deep into the mountains, deep underground where no one could find them. Surprisingly, they found mushrooms and roots and rats to sustain them, sending the occasional scouting party for meat. These goblins stayed hidden for generations and generations as their Kadin watched the outside world through the power of a spider's eye. These descendants of the great Kadin Rashmish became known as the Moonies, the Night Goblin. And Rashmish, secretly with her eye, watched over all.
All right, so that was Cord presenting the story of Rashmish. Rashmish finding the Obelis. That was fantastic. Thank you, Cord. Yeah, if anyone has any discussion about
What?
about that,
Or questions.
yeah.
Some of us have to work tomorrow, so I didn't paint up.
Yeah,
I've been on Zooms all day long, but really, honestly, I could have done them green. I have no excuse. It's true. And yes, I am green where it counts.
Hey, at least with orange, it just looks like I'm sunburned. Wash it off.
Bad spray tan, yeah.
Kobolds. You got me, Rotten.
All right.
It's one of the benefits of a race where I don't have to paint.
Lazy.
Here, here. All right. Well, let me check my itinerary real quick. That was Cord presenting the story of Rashmish finding and getting the Obelis. So, if you're curious about anything like that, there are certainly a lot of artifacts in Belagarth. We saw a little bit about King Neb from Slips. We saw something about the Obelis from Cord. So artifacts are a big part of Belagarth, if we want to kind of talk about that for just a sec. But there's a lot of real-world counterparts to these artifacts, in fact. So go ahead and ask people around, and I'm sure you can find them, track them down. But if you're curious at all about Belagarth history, there's quite a few of those floating around here and there. Cord saying that's better than I thought it would be. Oh, it was fantastic. You did a great job.
A+.
But we actually have another story about a Belagarth artifact coming up. This is going to be Ghanima presenting about another Obelis, the Eye of the Spider of Fate, another one that is not the one that Rashmish took. So I'm going to just jump right through into that, unless anyone has anything to stop me. Doesn't sound like it.
Okay. Okay.
Let me find it real quick. So this is Ganema once again presenting about the Obelisk. Did that go through? No, it didn't. Where did it go? Present. One moment. There we go. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Kronos, as with all young rulers, often wandered. Sometimes he and Una would wander together. Sometimes it was just him and his ravens. But this time he was alone. Mtesney had been gone for several days, and his absence made Ugengi's slights and loud jokes unbearable. Nor could he stand the way Una looked at Ugengi, and how she told him it was just a joke, and to be merry and well. Ugengi was always this way after a big hunt. And Kronos' eyes narrowed in anger, thinking about it. He was far of sight and keen of hearing, and he heard a great commotion up ahead. So he stopped, and silent as death, he crept up and witnessed something strange. He saw small green creatures, speaking in a swift and biting tongue, and he saw taller, paler creatures with sparkling eyes. They were unlike the animals in the valley, for they were aware and spoke in different ways that he was unfamiliar with. However, they weren't spirits. He watched as they fought bitterly, the tall ones seeming to try and flee with something. Neither side relented, and soon all save one of the green ones had fallen. It appeared to be the leader, who wore a ragged strap over one shoulder. It went and retrieved a small object from one of the tall pale ones, and as soon as his hand touched upon the object, it turned to look in his direction. It screamed in rage and leapt with a strength and speed that did not match its size. The Kronos, though, was swifter still, and with a precise slash of his knife, the strange green creature fell, its blood pouring out upon the ground. He saw then, for the first time, what the battle had seemingly been about. A small wooden orb, smooth and stained with blood. A single mark existed on its center. Cautiously he touched it, but nothing happened. Then he gripped it in his hand, and again nothing happened. He would have abandoned it then. However, he heard new voices and saw a large group of the pale creatures approaching, riding on the backs of animals he had never seen before. They shouted urgently, and when they came upon the ruins of the battle, they searched the bodies, both of their own kin and the others. He heard one word that stood out in his mind: obelisk. It felt like a word of power, and at very least a word of great import. Kronos quickly took cover and realized soon that whatever the orb was, it was important to these tall pale ones. As soon as they were done searching the bodies, they pushed on ahead, presumably in the same way the green ones had come from. Kronos raced home, determined to learn the secrets of this obelisk. When he returned, he found that Mtesney had returned as well, though now bearing a stone hand, and an understanding he had not had before. When Kronos spoke of encountering the creatures, Mtesney nodded and warned the tribe of others as well. And he gave them names: goblins, elves, others. Though protected by the valley, by the shelter provided by the mountainside, the ways beyond the mountain were not safe, and only those prepared for battle should ever go forth that way. He told Kronos not to worry over the orb, for it did not concern them. Kronos realized then that things would change. Many events too numerous to account in one story occurred, many of which you all know. You know of Una's encounter with the great serpent and tortoise. You know of Kronos stealing the knowledge of the forge from the dwarves, and you know of Ugengi's 9 victories. You know the great deeds of strength and courage performed by the four, and all of these occurred while the obelisk's power remained untapped, its secrets unhidden in favor of war and dominance. Kronos was clever and knew that Mtesney was holding on back. He was certain beyond doubt that Mtesney held the key to unlocking the power of the orb. But every time he asked, he was turned away and told such things did not concern them. This would change, however, one night, As Una was binding Ugangi's wounds, Ugangi was angry at the stinging of the open flesh and the chiding words of his sister, and he lashed out. He berated Kronos for his lack of injury, claiming it was a lack of courage. Kronos often coming in quickly from behind, stealing the kill cleanly without any danger to his own skin. Ugangi banged on his chest, loudly declaring that only by a show of blood could Kronos ever impress him. Una tried to intervene between the two, chastising Ugangi again for his outburst, but Kronos had had enough. He stood before the fire with his knife, and he deftly cut out his own eye and threw it into the flames. There, Ugangi, is your show of blood. Have you the courage to do it too? And he offered Ugangi the knife. Una screamed in horror and slapped Kronos across the face. What have you done? She implored. But Kronos would not stand down. And as the blood trailed down his face, he stared at his brother, who for once had no words or teasing jokes, merely sat stoically in surprise and discontent, staring at his brother's bloodied face. Una convinced Kronos finally to sit down, and she tended to the wound. Once the bleeding had ceased, she grasped his shoulders and asked why he had done such a thing. Ugangi's flesh will heal, but your eye is gone forever, she cried. Even I cannot bring it back. It may be so, Kronos said, but if Utesny can create a hand from stone, so too may I gain new sight. Una shook her head. You know what he will say. You know what he has always said. But Kronos placed the bloodied orb, the obelisk, in her hand. Take this to Utesny, he said. Perhaps he will not deny you as he does me. Perhaps he will look upon my show of faith and reward me. Am I not too deserving of wisdom? Una looked at Kronos sadly and despairingly, but she complied, for she could not bear to leave him this way. She went to find Utesny, who could often be found sleeping under a tree apart from the other three. She approached carefully but purposefully, and told him of what had occurred around the fire, and what Kronos asked of him now. Utesny shook his head. Una, he chided, such things are not for us. We must look to our own gifts, and not worry about the powers of others, said Utesny definitively. But Utesny, Una said, her words taking on a wizened tone, is it not with the power of others that Kronos has given us great weapons? Is it not with these weapons that we beat back those who would besiege us? Is not Ugangi's spear feared above all, and my twin blades used in defense of our people? Is it not your axe used to hammer our foes back? You know how Ugangi jokes against him. You know how his pride is often hurt. Do not deny me this, Utesny. If ever you have cared about me, if ever I have meant something to you, let me help him regain what he has so foolishly thrown away. Let me help him before we lose him to despair. Perhaps he will find he no longer need care about Ugangi's stupid jokes and jibes. Utesny sighed, and he looked at the bloodied orb. She wiped the blood off of it, but Utesny stopped her. He looked closely at the obelisk. He could sense a power held deep within it, but not available to him. He closed his eyes and concentrated, and powerful runes appeared before him. He took a blade and carved them in. It took all his strength, as the wood was hard as stone. As he carved, Kronos' blood filled the grooves and stained them red. As he carved, he felt a humming as the power within the eyes surged forth. He held it in his stone hand, which began to glow hot as he held the thing of power. And once done, he handed it back to Una in a cloth and told her to cool it in the stream. It burned warm in her hands through the cloth, and Utesny cautioned her not to touch it, as it was bound to Kronos and Kronos only now. Only he could handle it without penalty. She took it to the stream, and while still in the cloth, set it in the water, and it hissed as the heat encountered the wetness of the water. Everything around her seemed to freeze and go silent. And when she removed the eye, she found it cool, and being careful to keep the cloth between her and it, she looked at it. Kronos' handprint was marked in red upon its surface that would not rub away, and the runes remained bright and shone despite the bath, and the mark in the center stood out bright white in the moonlight. She returned to find Ugangi asleep by the fire and Ukronos waiting patiently. She presented it to him and watched as he, smiling, grabbed hold of it, placed it in his wounded socket. His head jolted slightly as his body adjusted to it, and he laughed as he realized he could see the fates of others. He looked at Una and his face suddenly contorted. And then he looked to Ugangi and turned sober, quickly averting his gaze. He took the cloth she had carried it in and covered the eye, noting to a worried Una that he had been given a great gift in return for his act, and left for his own bed. He clasped her hands as he left, and Una felt a shiver. Una shook her head and said a silent prayer that she had not made a grave mistake, while dark clouds started swirling above. This is the story of Ukronos finding the obelisk.
All right, so that was Ghanima performing a story about the obelisk. That was the Eye of Ukronos specifically, which is a particular obelisk. There are allegedly quite a few of them floating around out there, but the Eye of Ukronos is a unique one in that it has story ties to the ogres. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about that lore piece, or about any lore in general? Well, we've got... I'm going to switch around a couple things here. If Puck is ready to perform, we actually have one live performance that's supposed to be going on. Our only non-video submission.
1 second. If you can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Okay. I will be right back, but yes, I will be able to perform here in a second.
Okay, let's give Puck a minute or two. In the meantime, how's everyone doing? Does everyone feel good about the performances so far?
Oh, they've been fantastic.
Awesome.
Ghanima and Kazi's setup is like the coolest thing in the world. My closet does not compare.
Right,
Your
I am
closet
so
is still
jealous.
But yes, they did a lot of work into it.
I want that setup so bad.
Yeah, they put a lot of time and effort into it, and I'm sure money. But they've definitely got a lot of cool things in it. I don't know if you could see particularly clearly, but among one of the things that was zoomed in on was the actual Eye of Ukronos in the video.
Yeah, it was all marked up with runes and stuff. It looked pretty neat.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ready.
All right, it sounds like Puck is ready, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Hello, I'm Puck. I am a very old kobold. I'm here to tell you a few tales. One will be a darker tale. The other one will be a nice, light-hearted poem. I think it is best to start light. So, without further ado, this is the poem about the first kobold. Before the befores, the woes and lamentings, indeed before the invent of inventing, before all the gobos, the planet, the elves, the kobold invented himself. And falling, as really what else could he do? He missed the darn thing when he made up the moon. Bored of the falling, he made lending hands, and the kobold invented landing and land. Not in that order. Proud of his crafting a newly minted earth, he did feel quite parched, for he'd invented thirst. Nary a drop could the poor kobold see, so the kobold invented the sea. Upon taking a sip, he felt the first anguish. He screamed, "That was way too salty," thus inventing language. In the second ever sentence, he crooned, "Give me a break," and then he got busy making rivers and lakes. Slaked from a sip, he found himself tired, invented napping, waking, being chilly, then fire. No longer tired or thirsty or cold, the first ever kobold began to feel bold. He roamed the land of the earth shiny new, knowing he had more inventing to do. That is the story of the first kobold and how the whole universe was created, just to let you know. All right.
You're welcome. We invented.
All right. The other is a little more serious. You all know, well, some of you know, citation needed, some of you know that kobolds are known as the Rainbow of Spite. And you have obviously seen the rainbow. But have you seen the spite? This is the story of the first ash eater. Long ago, before man had kingdoms, there was a great kingdom. A kingdom that spread across the whole planet. A kingdom of kobolds. And ruling that kingdom was Reap. Reap was a great being. And this was a time before all kobolds were mostly orange. They could be any color of the rainbow, but Reap was orange. Reap had everything. Everything he ever could have wanted. He had a mountain of gold. He had so many treasures and so much greed for more. Some would say he invented greed. His greatest treasure of all, though, was Essa. Essa the kobold, with scales every color of the rainbow. Every time he went out to get something new and shiny, he would bring it home, and the first person he would show it to was Essa. Long into his reign, Reap heard rumor of something precious off in the forest to the north. Something great and powerful. A totem belonging to a witch, a hag. Well, knowing there was something valuable and knowing that he did not own it, well, he simply had to own it, didn't he? So, alone, for he knew he was mighty, he took the 5-day journey, walking through forests, scrounging for food along the way, climbing trees for fruit, eating small animals, until he found it. The treasure. But it wasn't shiny. It was just a carved piece of wood. Dirty. Gross. Stinky. He hated it. How could he move and travel for 5 days, all of that work, for some piece of crap? No, he wouldn't have that. So what did he do? Well, if the witch was going to say this was valuable, she didn't deserve to have it anymore. So he burnt it to ash, danced around the fires, and headed home. Now, the witch, hearing that her sacred totem had been burned to ash, felt someone needed to be punished for this. So, through the night, she chanted her spells, weaved her curses, yelled her hexes, and, well, Reap didn't notice anything at first. Walking home, not at first. He didn't notice the ground turning gray at his feet. What he did notice is, feeling a little hungry, he saw a low-hanging fruit, and he reached out to try to grab it, and in his grasp, it turned to ash. That was strange. Okay, he would just climb another tree and get a fruit from there. He tried, but the tree turned to ash. Panicking now, he had to get some food. He had to hurry home. So 5 days he went without eating. It's a long time for a kobold. Frail and tired, he made his way to his great kingdom, trying to push the gates open, and they collapsed into ash. That didn't make any sense. And Essa came to see him, and she wanted to see what he'd brought home. And she came to him and embraced him and turned to ash in his clutches. Panicking, he was delirious now. He needed to find some comfort. He needed his treasure, his mountain of gold. He touched it, and it turned to ash in his grasp. Looking around, everyone rushing to help him, they all turned to ash, and he heard it. In his mind, the explanation, the witch's voice. You have turned something precious to me to ash, and I have made it so all you touch has turned to ash. Ha ha! Well, with nothing shining, nothing he adored, nothing that was his own, all he had left was rage and spite. He started walking north. Frailer and frailer he became as he stepped, speaking under his voice the whole time. Essa to ash, all to ash. And no longer did he skitter about panicking. No, he touched everything he could on the way. One day, Essa to ash, all to ash. 2, 3, 4. He was not at all recognizable as his bright and valiant self. No, he was gray, covered in ash, thin as bone, as he walked into the hut of that witch. Taken aback, he only said one thing as he approached. Essa to ash, all to ash. And he was so hungry. He reached out and he took her arm. It turned to ash in his grasp, but he still shoved it into his mouth. Oh, it was sweet. It tasted of revenge. Oh, he grabbed her other arm. Oh, Essa to ash. Oh, to ash. Ooh, her leg. Oh, Essa to ash. Oh, to ash. Her other leg. Until nothing was left. Oh, he was really starting to love the taste of ash. Thank you.
That's one of my favorite of the kobold stories.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Puck.
Especially when I started as a kobold myself, it was one of my favorites. Being in California on the Ash Coast, I am one of the, I think actually at this point, the only non-ash eater in California. Pretty much yeah. It's okay. It's a great story. That's why a lot of them went ash eater. They liked it. And it's a beautiful story. And like kobolds, we have weird stories, but we also have some really serious ones. As I was talking to Dag'r about it, a lot of these stories are based in the reality of what happened in the sport. So I don't know how many of you have met the first kobold, the Kobold Prime. He's a weird dude. Like, weird dude. So, of course, a lot of our stories come about because of the weirdness that is kobolds. You know, Shrat is... There's a whole time traveler story of Shrat. There's a lot of crazy stories that things Shrat did. So I love that a lot of these come from like things that actually happened, and so it lets them be weird.
Yeah, a lot of monster history is steeped in very interesting people. Yeah, there's a lot of great figures that you can learn a lot of great things from. A lot of monster history is caught up in some very unique people. Shrat, I've heard wonderful things about. I've not had the pleasure of meeting, but I'm sure the stories don't even do it justice.
I've never gotten to meet him in person, but I've gotten to talk to him on Facebook quite a few times, and you can get a gist off of those conversations.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, thank you again, Puck. That was a fantastic storytelling. Both
Absolutely.
the poem and the story were outstanding.
I may be biased, but they're my favorite.
Yeah, I've always loved your storytelling. Big influence for me. So I appreciate you taking the time to come in and present for us. So switching gears, I wanted to talk a little bit about origins. Puck kind of touched on the origins of the first kobold, invent the kobold. So we've got the last few stories here. We've got some creation myths. We've got the ogre creation story, the goblin creation story, and the gnoll creation story are our last three here. One of which is performed by me. I think we might do that one next, I think is on my list here. Does that sound right, Krash?
Yeah.
Okay. Pardon the heavy edits. This took me quite a while to get through. It's quite a hefty story. But I believe Quinn's in here. Quinn actually wrote this one. So hopefully I do it some justice. And I'm just going to jump right over to presenting the video of the gnoll origins. Long ago, with a crash and a boom, the world was created. By who or what, you may ask? It doesn't matter. Ask the trolls if you're curious. But it was not long before the gods began to meddle in the earth and began to create. And so, one such god, known as Marjak, created a creature that came to be called the bugbear. And bugbears were built in his image, powerful and loyal, marked with his mark. And so, he declared them a rousing success. It was not long before Marjak was discontent, decided to create something unlike himself and unlike the bugbear. And so he created a being that came to be called Anka. And Anka was dangerous. She was the apex of power and savagery. She had a body as unyielding as stone, limbs like tree trunks. She was a frightful force upon the earth. But it was not long before she began to resent Marjak, for she could constantly feel his fiery gaze upon her. And her will was not like that of the bugbear. Instead, she was wild, had a free spirit. So, before long, she was set upon the earth, where she encountered other creatures, such as the warlike goblins. And Anka, a being of great power, set out to destroy these pests upon the earth. And Marjak saw this as an opportunity to clear the way for his bugbears, and so sent down his own earthly avatar to help aid her in this conquest, a being known as Zulhan. But Marjak knew that Anka would not trust him or Zulhan, and so sent him as a reflection of her own. Her form mirrored in his, so he gained her trust. and the two of them set about to destroy the races upon the earth. And they brought destruction and pain to many, conscripted many forces into armies, and conquered all of the land. And among this conquering, there was a creature that they took to come as spoils of war that came to be known as the hyena. And Anka grew a fondness for these creatures, who, as forces of death, killed many enemies. And most of all, she loved their laughter, how they laughed at the world, they laughed at their fallen prey, they laughed at their captors. She envisioned, as they laughed, her triumphant day, where she would finally throw off the shackles of Marjack and be free from his gaze and laugh in triumph, victorious glee. But the war was not over. The goblins had rallied strong, and Zulhan and Anka grew distrustful of one another. Anka had heard Zulhan whisper in the night as though speaking to an otherworldly force, and had noticed how they never seemed to attack bugbears. And of course, Zulhan was growing angry at Anka's distractions and her affections for the loyalties of hyenas. During the heat of a particularly intense battle, as siege weapons raged upon Zulhan, he was struck by a rock, a bullet from a trebuchet, and for a moment the glamour upon him was broken, and Anka would not have noticed initially the disguise that had faded, if not for the baying and barking of her hyenas, alerting her to the sudden appearance of this bugbear-like creature that Zulhan truly was. But Anka knew she could not strike him directly, and so kept this a secret, till she could finally make her attack. She had heard of goblin champions, many powerful mages or warriors who could potentially fell a demigod. So she brought to Zulhan the idea that they may strike down one of these champions, which of course he was on board with. If the goblins were dealt such a blow, they may collapse and rout. So the two of them set out to find a goblin champion, and they discovered a goblin sorceress. And on the day of battle, they raged against one another, the armies clashing, many goblins falling before them, but many casualties of their own armies. And it was not long before the magic raged around them, and spells were hurled by the sorceress, and illusions were cast, and the ambient energies of the area were crashing with lightning. So the armies of Zulhan and Anka were reduced to ash, all but the hyenas, who in their craftiness had survived the battle. But Anka could see that the tides were turning, and it was not long before she had to make a move where Zulhan would surely defeat the goblin champion. He had a well of power much deeper than she had imagined. So, with a leaping lunge, she yelled and screamed as she attacked. And as she did so, she was struck by a bolt of lightning from the sky. And this bolt of lightning robbed her of her earthly sight, nearly killed her in her weakened state. But being so close to death, she could see the veil between worlds, and saw the tether that held Marjack to this earth. She saw the magic within the goblins. She saw the desperation and will of her hyenas. But most damningly, the tether between Zulhan and Marjack. And so, with renewed purpose, she stood, dazed from her lightning strike, and so she jumped and leaped at Marjack and Zulhan and the tether between them. And Zulhan threw up his guard as though to block, but did not realize her target till the last moment. And she screamed, Ma'alda Kashal Kesh, and the cord was severed. And the power left Zulhan's body, and he fell inanimate and limp. And as he did so, Anka took the cord from between Marjack and Zulhan's body and grasped it with her hands and used its power. She knew she only had a few moments before Marjack would descend upon her, full of rage. But she took this moment to remove his mark from her. For a few moments, she would be free from his gaze. And so she took the power of Zulhan's body, and she also took a moment to feed the hyenas the body of Zulhan, imbuing each piece with a little power of Marjack. She knew this deed would not go unpunished, but
but she felt it a fitting end to Marjak's avatar. And so the hyenas began to feast, and as they did so, they underwent a startling transformation. Their bones cracked as their spines lifted them from the ground on two legs. Their brains underwent startling development, language and thought previously unheard of for hyenas. And they burst forth from the side of the great feeding with a cackling laughter, a tide of hunger and devastation, destroying all in its wake. This brought Anka glee, but it was short-lived. For moments later, Marjak descended upon her, furious, and instead of killing her, he plucked her from the earth and snatched her up and put her on a burning star, the hottest in the galaxy, where she would writhe and suffer for all eternity. So she now, for time eternal, writhes upon a burning star in the hottest part of the galaxy, forever under his watchful gaze, burning and suffering. And so, as the gods began to pick up their playthings and decide where their beings would live, their races upon the earth, the gnolls were unspoken for, as the rest of the races had gods claim their locations. None spoke for the gnoll, so they were cursed to roam the lands, nomads. But for those that could still listen, they could hear the distant screams of Anka, now reduced to a hoarse whisper. And her writhing pain had brought her clarity and visions of the future, and her whispers were now apocrypha. As she whispered secrets of the apocalypse, of blood and fire, of the fall of all things. And this is the story of Anka, and the story of gnolls. May all false prophets and versions meet a gruesome end.
All right, that was a heavily edited version of the Gnoll origin story, but it is told. If anyone has any questions or thoughts about origin stories in general, because that's the subject of the last little bit we've got here, feel free to bring them up. No? Okay, well, we've got just a couple more videos, and then we're going to open the floor to anyone that still wants to present, but we are nearing the end of the scheduled amount of programming, so we're going to kind of run it freeform after that, if there's still time to do anything. So yeah. Let's see, what is next? I have the Ogre creation story coming up next, also presented by Ganema. So we're gonna switch to that. And present a window right there.
I'm going to tell you how it all began. Great Father Uron and the earth formed at the same time, the same moment of creation. We conceived the moment that earth touched sky, warmed in the center of the earth and birthed via the womb, the ocean. There were twins, you see, the earth, Jord, and Uron. One instinctual, animalistic, feral, the other with a purpose and a mind. And he called the earth the wellspring, the souls of all, the Uon. And he watched as the earth instinctively spread out itself, split, divided, multiplied. Animals, plants, and the spirits. And he watched and he learned the secrets of life and creation itself. And he turned his eyes also to murk, to the vastness beyond, and learned the secrets of the cosmos. And when he turned his attention there, he became aware of other beings akin to him. Became aware of the great Malashikad, Marjak, first and greatest of his creations. There was also Coralon and Pisron, and many others, too numerous to count and honestly of little consequence. And they existed out in the vastness and murk, but he would talk with them, converse. And he spoke with Malashakad about Malashakad's great boredom, his great dissatisfaction with all he had made so far, for you see, it never changed. It was always the same. He had a new idea, an idea for a different creation, one that would always entertain him countlessly and endlessly. So Uran was intrigued and said, let's see your creation. The thing was, this creation could not live in the vastness. It had to be on Earth. And Uran watched as they sprang up, and he laughed. He laughed at their smallness, their weakness, their lacking in wisdom. For you see, they were chaotic, impulsive creatures, many prone to dying shortly after birth. Various trivial reasons. And he laughed and said, Malashakad, take this creation away. It is beneath you, and it is beneath my earth to have them here. But Malashakad was pleased. He was pleased with his goblins. And he knew that they would entertain him for all eternity. And so he made a great bet with Uran, and he said, do you think you can do better? And Uran was certain he could. So he said, then you make your creation, Uran. And then they will contend together, and we will see who will get to claim the earth. For Malashakad, there was no downside to this, for in their contentions, their wars, there would be endless entertainment. So Uran formed great mountains of ice, and he took earth, wet it with water, fired it in the kilns of the very bellies of the earth, cooled it in the breeze, in the sky, and from their souls he took from the Ulan itself and fashioned them into his own liking and his own image. So he made the first ogres, the Gerad, great and powerful, and over generations and tests and trials and tribulations, he perfected them and made them near perfect to his eyes. But while this was going on, he was distracted. And Malashakad, too, lacking in patience of waiting, turned his attention elsewhere. And the other gods grew envious. They, too, wanted beings in their own image, wanting to be worshipped, wanting to experience the thrill of creation and then watching what you have made. And so they put their creations on the earth, the bugbears, the elves, other lesser beings. But they could not contend with the children of Malashakad, for they had been made without the innate knowledge of the world or vast powers Malashakad possessed. And so those gods, especially Mardrak, grew angry and dissatisfied. Their creations had just as much right as any else. So they went to Uran and told Uran, we have come up with a plan to diminish Malashakad's creation and so make space for our own. And Uran was upset. What right had they to his earth? He had never agreed to that. How dare they? It was the bet he had with Malashakad for his creation to contend with them, not theirs. He turned his back and said he would not, and that they needed to take their creations away. And so, combined together, the other gods struck Uran when his back was turned, and by their combined powers, he realized the blow was fatal. And he felt for the first time in his life fear. For he knew that his creation, though nearly done, was not yet ready to contend with all the forces that would soon be upon them. Between the goblins and these other creatures he had known nothing about, they were not ready. So he laid down his body across the landscape and became a great mountainside so as to shield them. And the blood from his body became a great river with which to nourish them. And with the last of his spirit, as it was pouring out from him, he took 4 trees and put into them the last of his spirit, the last of what he was. And when the Garad came to look upon their fallen father and realized he was dead, clutched in his arms, they found 4 infant ogres, as perfect of form as could be imagined. And they were named Ugengi, Utesni, Ukronos, and Una. And over time they grew into the gods we know today. Our gods who watch over us and who watch over all of Yord. They are our final gift from our Allfather, and whom we owe all. This is how ogres came to be.
All right, that was Ganema presenting the origin stories of the ogre. You might recognize the 4 ogre babies towards the end are the same that were in the story of the Obelis. Those are the 4 ogre gods of the children of Uran. But yeah, there's quite a bit going on with those creation stories, and there's a lot going on with all sorts of lore. So if you have any questions, I'm sure you can shoot them to Ganema for ogre information or anyone else that knows their stuff. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments or questions about any of that? I see a raised hand. Is that a hi?
I was just waving at Dickie, who is muted.
Yes. Okay. Well, I have one more story, and it is the Goblin creation story from Kazi, and then we're going to kind of open it. I wanted to plug the Geddon real quick and point out that a lot of these stories can be found on geddon.org. That's our wiki. So most of these stories have been written out over many years in the history of Belgarth, and they are available in written format on geddon.org. If you search the various names of monster races or even non-monsters, there's lore to be found in abundance on the wiki. So feel free to check it out if you get the time. It can be definitely a time sink. I spend a lot of time on the wiki. So I'm going to jump over to the final structured story, and then I'll open it up. If anyone else wants to present, they can, but we've got one more here. It is the Goblin creation story presented by Kazi. As soon as I pull it up. Let's see.
Now, the goblins tell things a little bit differently, so allow me. Malashakad awoke into nothing. White, empty, endless, airless, cold. Stretching for eternity. He kneeled and hold himself against the cold, and he noticed under his feet there be a small depression. He did, and he touched it, and he realized that this must be where his heart had lay against the fabric of the world as he slept. And he kneeled close to the heat, and he breathed into it, and the stars ignite, and the galaxies spin out, and the universe is made. Malashakad wandered for ages in his universe, seeing the wonders of the stars. But, okay guys, let's be honest. This seen a star, you've seen all the stars. Like, okay, this one's red, this one's blue, this one's white. All right, cool, great, awesome. You see, nebula, very pretty nebula. Yeah, I've seen many. It's boring. It doesn't change. It's all you've seen it once. You've seen it 1,000 times. And he's bored. He's alone. Until one day, he noticed something moving way down there. Little thing, tiny thing. And he said to himself, "What is this? What is this creature?" You think it moved? Oh, it talk. Hey, who are you? He cried out, and the creature looked around. Who is this talking to me? Who is this other creature? And the little thing being Marjak, who I suppose, the god of the bugbears, who I suppose is like Malashikad, who's really big. Malashikad's like a little rock. They're made from the same thing. Neither of them created each other. They're made from the same stuff that awoke and became Malashikad. Also awoke and became Marjak. So I guess it's like, but only a little bit of it. So like maybe like the skid mark that Malashikad leave on the fabric of reality when he get his ass up off whatever. I don't know. That's Marjak. You're not allowed to show this to Hakan, by the way. We're not allowed to show this video to the Hive Walker. We don't do this. It's illegal. You'll go to jail. Now, this made Malashikad think. He say, "I'm very bored. I've been watching stars for 50,000 years, and I'm sick of it. But if he exists and I exist, maybe other things can exist, and maybe they would not be so goddamn boring." So he says, "I will make something. I made stars. Maybe I can make something that's like maybe a little bit more alike." So he looked deep into himself, into the spirit stuff, and he pull out from his spirit, he pull out the essence, and he makes something. And it's awakened. And he said, "Who are you?" And the thing says, "Oh, I'm Uran." He's like, "Oh, Uran, okay, that's interesting." And he had made a god. Like a god, like him, not as great as him, not as big as him, but a god. And so that was pretty cool. So Malashikad kept creating things, creating gods, big gods, little gods, hairy gods, skinny gods, fat gods, and then like different all types of gods. And he just creating, creating. And but eventually, first that was cool, but eventually, so many gods. And at first that was cool, and it was very entertaining because they're pretty weird. But there's a problem. Gods don't change. They are created as they are, and then they stay that way forever. Not a lot of character growth in gods, okay? So it gets boring again. So Malashikad say, "I don't want to make things that are eternal. I don't want to make things that are immortal. I want to make things that are like brief, So he creates animals and he creates plants. And this is wild. There's like birds and like snakes and like cats like running around like killing each other. I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating. And he's like watching an episode of the Discovery Channel for like a long time. But look, you can only watch so much of that until it's like, that also gets a little boring because, okay, here we go. This lion is killing the gazelle again. All right, cool. So boring. So he thinks to himself, I must find some way to create something that will entertain me forever. And he comes to the conclusion that if he can simply take the best of both, have something that is on the earth for a brief amount of time, that has to fight to survive, that lives and dies and loves, and then is gone. And then you combine it with the passions and the personalities of gods, well, then you could, that's a pretty interesting. So he realizes that he needs to create mortal creatures. So he tried. But Malashikad discovered that no matter how finely he tried to slice down from what he is, anything with even a spark of himself is a god or immortal of some kind. So he created a vast array of little spirits and demons and devils and all these sorts of things, all the way down as small as he can, but he cannot make anything that is immortal. Well, he concluded, maybe if I cannot, maybe I could with help. So maybe what I need is a mother for my creation. And you look around and say, well, who is the perfect mother? And he lay his eyes on, oh, here she is. Here she comes. Pace around. The cat. He see this cat creature flying around. Nasty, matted fur, hissing, spitting, peeing on everything. And he said, oh, she's perfect. She's perfect. And he thinks, okay, so he take a gem and he put the essence of his creation into it, of what he is and what he wishes to be. And they say, hey, Pesron. And Pesron's like, what do you want? Big asshole. And like, Pesron, did you drop this? And Pesron, did I? Is that mine? And Mushroom said, yes, I think this is yours. Pesron. Pesron like, oh, thank you. I did not even know I had lost it. And she come up and she take it and she touch it and she feel the curse and she's like, hey, you dick, was that cursed? And he's like, what, cursed? No, I mean, like, I guess that depends on your definition of curse, really, but, like, no. And she not believe him because he lied. And so she, like, I don't like he's in, scratch him and, like, scratch him up. And, like, eventually, after she done scratching him, she angrily fly back to Earth and do what she do when she upset, which is pee on things. Right? So she's like cruising around and she's peeing on things and like she's going and she stops and she looks and she's like, what is that? And there, right where she had pee, there's this little green creature getting up. And the green creature look at her and she look at it and she say, what are you? And the green creature say, what am I? What are you, you weird cat? And so she tear it to pieces. You know, oh, well, that was weird, but at least that's over. And and she look back where she got also peed, and there's more green things. And they're all looking at her like, oh shit, she just tore that dude apart. We should get out of here. And so they all run, and she flies around and tear them apart. But some of them get away. And, do what goblins do, and then there's lots of goblins, and then there's goblins in the world, right? Because that's us. We're goblins. And so, where piss around piss, goblins spring up. And, well, she not like that at all. So now she just pee into volcanoes, like giant volcanic kitty litter box, which is really rude, but I suppose understandable. And that is the story of the glorious creation of goblins.
Oh, that is such a great story.
Classic.
The classic and pea-filled story of the creation of goblins.
It's not the best creation, but what can you do?
That was Kazi presenting. Did a fantastic job. So with that, we are at the end of our scheduled presentations. We wanted to kind of open up the floor to anyone that still wanted to present, but it is officially over. I see one raised hand from Quinn. Quinn says, it's all good. Oh, for misspelling Knowles. Okay. I see a raised hand, though. Is that relevant, Quinn? Yes. Quinn says yes. So Quinn has something. Trying to unmute. Trying to unmute. Trying so hard to unmute.
While Quinn's working on unmuting, I'm going to take the time for all lore-loving people to say that tomorrow Antoinette will be doing a class on telling your lore through your garb and your accessories at 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. And on Saturday, Anya will be doing a class titled What the Fae, focused on Fae lore. So I encourage everyone to come and attend to that.
Very cool. Yes, if people could check those out, that sounds awesome. Thank you for the plug. Quinn, do you have your mute figured out?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
A little bit.
Hi, Quinn.
Hi, Quinn.
Hi, Quinn.
I'm Quinn. Let me set up. Okay, so if there's, I assume there's time, I'd like to share a quick story.
I mean, we're in the freeform section of it, so there is time.
Okay. Well, as long as there's time, I'd like to bring you a story of a great, well, I wouldn't call her a Knoll champion, but perhaps a Knoll whose name you've heard, or at least after today, the Knolls whose name you should remember. This, of course, is the tale of Kuru, the Mad Monarch. Now, some say she never lost a battle. Such was her strength. Some say she was undefeated in Yaket. Such was her mind. Some say she laughed in the face of death so often its robes were covered in her saliva. Her power attracted many, and her clan swelled in size. Above all, though, she was known for her cruelty. This was quite the feat, given the company she kept. Now one day, Kuru heard rumors of a dwarven clan in possession of a golden crown, shinier than the sun, held deep within their mountain fortress. Kuru's pride compelled her to assault them, for she knew that crown belonged to her. And she knew that there was no place for mercy in her heart. War would come, but even she knew it would be a fool's errand to attack without preparation. To do this, she issued a decree. Half of all rations would be surrendered to her. After all, the clan's warriors would need to be lean and quick to dodge the hammers and shields of the dwarves, and her superior tactics required extra food for thinking. All were unhappy with this decree, but they complied. After several moons of training and cut rations, Kuru led a band of warriors into battle against the dwarves. But to her surprise, their power was too great. They didn't even set foot in the Dwarven Mountain that day. The warband took many casualties, and Kuru was forced to retreat. Kuru was frustrated by this and issued another decree. Each warrior would train day and night, and would only see their loved ones in their dreams. This time, her followers were even more hesitant to follow the order. Some even attempted to flee, but each one was captured and beaten into submission. In time, Kuru led another assault on the dwarven stronghold. Again, her warriors were no match for the entrenched dwarves. Though they entered the stronghold, they saw neither treasure nor a scrap of food from the dwarven feasting halls. Again, Kuru was forced to retreat. By this time, there were rumblings of Kuru's failings. She had led her clan into a war with nothing to show for it. She had cut their rations and taken their loved ones, and still she was too proud to abandon this foolish endeavor. To this, Kuru issued a final decree. She would eat the largest cub of each litter so that none would grow large enough to usurp her. She redoubled their training efforts and formulated a grand strategy to defeat the dwarves once and for all. In time, Kuru led this grand assault. Between their unending training and their half-starved madness, her warriors felled every dwarf that stood before them, cutting and biting and tearing their way deep into the mountain. As Kuru's pack found their way to the greatest of the dwarven feasting halls, they found their leader. Without hesitation, They tore him limb from limb, practically eating the golden crown upon his head. It was only Kuru who stopped them, plucking it from their jaws and placing it on her own head. Before he shuffled off this mortal coil, however, the dwarven leader let out a death curse upon Kuru. May you choke upon the spoils of your war, he said, before leaving this earth. Kuru laughed in triumph, for she knew she was stronger than any curse. And in recognition of her victory, she demanded a great feast that would take place in the halls of the slain dwarves. This would be her magnum opus, her greatest victory. She sat at the head of the table as more and more food was brought to her. And as she ate, she demanded that every warrior wait until she was finished. Because, after all, how could they have won this battle without her? She gorged herself, threatening to consume every scrap of food in the stronghold. As she was about to eat the last flank of meat, though, she began to choke. Her warriors stared at her, those that were left, but none moved to help. She slammed her claws upon the table, gagging and choking. Each of her pack instead stared at her hungrily and remembered the decrees she had given, to starve them even as she grew fat, to take them from their loved ones, to devour their young, to preserve her rule. Kuru clawed at her throat in silence, before finally falling dead. In the end, her rule of iron was broken by her own cruelty, not to her enemies, but to her friends, her family. And to this I plead to you, learn well. Never let your pride outstrip your loyalty to your clan. Okay, that's it.
That was awesome.
Well, thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Quinn. That was excellent. I'm super excited to hear that because that's something that I tasked Quinn with doing. That was telling a lore story that I wrote. That was her interpretation of Kuru, which is on the Geddon differently than that, but that was a fantastic telling. I super love hearing it. Yeah, that was great. If anyone has any other presentations, the floor is open.
That's one of the things I love about lore is that it changes depending on who tells it.
Yeah, that's
because it's like this great big game of telephone.
Yeah,
I tell stories of things I wasn't even in the sport for.
Yeah.
Like, here, I'll tell you guys one of my favorites. So, kobolds, some do, some don't. We have nomicons. It's to remind us, because we forget. Well, many moons ago, there was a young bugbear. He was tasked to give a hot dog sandwich to someone he never met, a man named Shrek, a kobold. Did not know what kobold was. So he goes over from camp to camp. He goes to the first camp and he says, "Hey, I'm looking for Shrat." He's like, "Oh, no, Shrat, he went that way, over there." So he makes his way to the next camp. Yes, "Hey, look, I'm trying to find Shrat. I have food." Like, "Oh, he went that way." So he goes that way. He looks, can't find Shrat. And he continues to do this for hours. Finally, exhausted beyond all compare, he goes back to his original camp. And he sees a lone kobold leaning against a tree. He says, "Hey, I'm looking for Shrat. And this kobold says, "Hey, he takes hot dog sandwich. Wait, no, you hold. Takes a book from his belt, opens it up, takes hot dog sandwich, and eats it. Bugbear's like, hey, that's for Shrat. He's like, I'm Shrat. In his book, on the first page, says he is Shrat. So as you see on mine, first page, I'm Krash. But to remind myself, I am not Shrat. Oh, the death clap. That's always been one of my favorite of the stories.
Yeah, that's an excellent one. Shrat and the Shratnomicon. That's a classic Bellegarth story that's been around for many, many years. That was a long time ago.
Long before I even joined the sport.
Yeah, that was before me too. So that's at least I want to say 15 years, maybe longer.
Before most of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Sin had something to say.
Yeah.
Did we want to do something for that? Sin, are you in here?
Yeah, I'm here. My stuff is... Oh, that is the wrong direction. Beep. I just have closing stuff, so if there are other people going and whatnot, then go ahead and do that first. So.
All right, then this is the last call. If anyone has anything else they'd like to present. I see no raised hands. I hear no mics. I think we're about wrapped up then. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, sounds good.
Also, Anya, miss your face too. But yeah, I mostly just wanted to thank everyone for coming out, Kitty. And thank you, Dag'r and Krash, for spearheading this. For those that don't already know, plan for next year. As long as, hardcore fingers crossed. Yeah. Chaos in person. The goal of Lore Night is to basically turn Monster Feast into dinner and a show that people can perform their lore, whether it's acting out a scene, whether it's spoken word, poems, stories, whatever it may be. Kind of have a platform and performance time and make it even more and it's not just for monsters, it's just anyone's lore, so lore in general, but especially for monsters, and give them another platform to be able to showcase all of the wonderful work that they do. So yeah, thank you all for attending, and thank you all for everyone that submitted. I think a couple of you are here for submitting things and kind of helping this become the first annual reality of a thing. And yeah, Dag'r and Krash, if y'all have anything else to say, once again, big thank you to both of you. So, and I love you all.
Thank you, Sin. I just wanted to give a quick thank you again to all the presenters. Thank you for everyone that showed up to listen. Thank you to anyone who's playing this back, maybe on YouTube or one of the channels that it might be on.
It will be on the Belgarth Chroniclers YouTube channel, which is it's a project I'm working towards as a apprentice for Chroniclers Guild. That is, we have the digital library on the Get-In for people's projects. It's meant to be the video library of if you want to do a tutorial, tell their lore, whatever. It's going to be posted on there for people to watch forever.
Yeah, it's a learning repository, a literal video library. So that's a fantastic project. Thank you for plugging that, Krash. So with that, I think we are wrapped up. Thank you, everyone, again.
If you are collecting points for a team for the blanket, comment now. I've only had 2 people tell me they need points for their team. So attendees and participants both can earn points.